Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Canada has produced some of the best musicians of the 20th century. Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Oscar Peterson, but I can name more, including one man who has been releasing material for the past 40 years. He's won multiple Junos and performed for fans across North America and Europe, not to mention his top-notch, pun-heavy posts on social media. I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X Biography. Today, I'm speaking to Ron Sexsmith. St. Catharines, Ontario has a strong musical legacy. Walter Ostanet, the multi-Grammy Award-winning polka king of Canada, was born there. Neil Peart, the professor and drummer for Rush, grew up there. Most of the members of Alexis on Fire and Our Lady Peace are from St. Catharines, as is Ron Sexsmith, who was born on January 8, 1964. As a youngster, he played his father's vinyl collection and became fascinated by what he heard. Now, his father had left when he was just 2 years old and was only occasionally in his life from then on. But his records made a huge impact on Ron, who realized that music was in his future. He said in an interview years later, "It's all I ever wanted to do since I was 4 or 5. His first steps was to start a band, which he did when he was 14, but like most teenage bands, it didn't go very far. But that didn't stop him. Just 3 years later, he was performing at the Lion's Tavern in his hometown. He was 17 years old and got the gig thanks to his brother Don, who played at the bar and got him an audition. For 2 to 3 nights every week, Ron played cover songs by Creedence Clearwater Revival, Bob Dylan, and other famous artists. And before long, Ron developed a reputation as a versatile performer who could play nearly any song requested. If he didn't know one on that night, he would spend the rest of the week learning it so he could be ready next time. He said, "All that standard stuff that people are still playing in the bars today, I was eager to please. So I'd learn every song, and every week people would come in with requests." He was called the one-man jukebox, and soon word spread that a teenager was putting on an excellent show multiple times a week. Unlike every great artist, though, he said in an interview he eventually got tired of singing other people's songs. He said, "It's the kind of place where you pretty much have to play mainly cover tunes. I played at all the bars and I kind of wore out my welcome there. I just had to move on. I saw a lot of others who started playing at the same time as I did, and it was kind of a dead end." He continued to plug away and focused on songwriting and not just performing. He would write songs in his head while he worked. And by 1985, his first child was born, and that triggered a need for change. He said he knew that if he was going to make something happen, he couldn't stay in St. Catharines. He said, "I felt that maybe I was a songwriter, and it seemed to me very clear that I had to pursue it. And in Canada, there's only a few cities where you can do that. There's Toronto, and there's Vancouver, maybe, but it's mainly Toronto. So we did the big move, and it took us 2 years just to save up all the money to finally get there." He eventually moved to the Beaches, a neighborhood in Toronto with its own musical legacy and history. Not only does his enclave in Toronto's East End host world-class musicians every year for the Beaches Jazz Festival, it was also the home of Canadian legends like Glenn Gould and Dan Hill. Ron said that this is also when he began to expand his musical taste to include Canadian artists such as Max Webster, April Wine, the Poppy Family, and especially Gordon Lightfoot.
You know, as a teenager, I mostly listened to English rock, you know, like the Kinks and that stuff. It's still very much in my DNA, that melodic sort of music of the Beatles and whatever. But around, I guess around the time my son was born, I took a turn towards my brethren, you know, and I got really into Leonard Cohen in a big way. When I finally zeroed in on their music, it was just really, I became obsessed, not just with them, but just with writing songs and trying to find my voice as a songwriter.
Living in Toronto also afforded him the opportunity to watch some of the best singer-songwriters at Massey Hall. The performance venue is arguably the most prestigious one in Canada. Built in 1894 by the prominent Massey family as a concert hall for both the rich and the poor, it has hosted some of the most influential acts in music history, including Joni Mitchell, Rush, and Bob Marley. Ron was able to see his musical heroes like Gordon Lightfoot and Bob Dylan perform there, and even when he couldn't afford a ticket, he could stand at the door to listen to the music. Never believing he could ever fill an arena, Ron set his goals on performing one day at Massey Hall, not as an opener, but a headliner, and he was well on his way. By the mid-1980s, Ron was confident in his songwriting and recorded a cassette tape with his friend and fellow singer-songwriter Claudio. Called Out of the Duff, it was released and it featured 5 original songs from Ron. It was just a small cassette, but Ron started to get noticed. In 1986, he released a full-length cassette, There's a Way, with producer Kurt Swinghammer, which was followed by the independent album Grand Opera Lane, and it included the song Speaking with the Angel. Now, word was getting out about Ron's talents as one of his tapes found its way down to Los Angeles and to a representative at Geffen Records who flew to Toronto to watch him play. Ron said he got mixed reviews. He said, "The verdict was generally that I was a good songwriter, but I wasn't a very good performer." A year later, the Geffen rep was at Interscope Music and immediately signed Ron to a publishing deal. He would be a writer for the company rather than a performer, but it was a foot in the door as his music continued to make the rounds and impress. Producer Mitchell Froom, who had produced the first 3 albums for Crowded House, really liked what he heard. Ron said, "A lot of the other producers were just, it's going to be great, you know, but they were very vague. Where Mitchell had this comment about my voice and the way to approach it and so on, it seemed like I could trust him and I was in good hands." Meanwhile, Ron continued to work on his music, often writing songs while working as a courier. He eventually had over 200 songs, some of which he had written years earlier and others that were newer, but he had to go through them to select the best ones as he prepared for his first studio album. And Mitchell Froom helped Ron fine-tune the selection as they sat down together to listen to the songs. Now, part of the process included input from Froom, who suggested ways to change things up. And in 1995, Ron released his self-titled first studio album, which he dedicated to singer-songwriter Harry Nilsson, who died a year earlier. It received good reviews, and the song Secret Heart was later used in an episode of The X-Files titled Babylon. And Ron said Secret Heart was also covered by Rod Stewart and Nick Lowe. He said, "It didn't amount to anything. I mean, it's a good calling card at Hatchell, but when I heard Rod's version, I thought this doesn't sound like a single. It didn't have drums and stuff on." The album, however, received praise from new wave icon Elvis Costello, who made Ron his opening act. His album had only been released in North America, no one was playing it, no one was talking about it, and he was about to be dropped by his record label. But towards the end of the year, Elvis Costello held up his record on the cover of the popular UK music magazine Mojo in December of 1995, and it changed everything for Ron. He was suddenly in demand in Europe, and people he had grown up admiring like Paul McCartney and Elton John started to champion him. That helped fuel him, and by 1997, Ron had released his second major label album, Other Songs, and it was another critical hit. The album received the Juno Award for Solo Roots and Traditional Album of the Year. 2 years later, Ron released his next album, Whereabouts, which also garnered critical acclaim when Rolling Stone magazine stated it had 12 near-perfect songs. The album also earned a Juno nomination. By 2001, Ron traveled to Nashville to record Blue Boy over 6 days, which was produced by Steve Earle. After his label refused to release it because of the stylistically diverse songs, Ron released it himself. It received acclaim from critics, and the Washington Post called the album shot through with crafty and engaging pop tunes that incorporate everything from backwards loops and string arrangements to jazz coloring and reggae beats. Ron also continued to perform with other prominent singer-songwriter artists. In 2002, he sang Gold in Them Hills with Chris Martin from Coldplay, which became a bonus track on his album Cobblestone Runway. He worked in the studio with Ray Davies of the Kinks in a memory that Ron called surreal. Elton John gave him a shout out on stage and invited him backstage to chat. And Ron's talents was being recognized by legends including The Who's Pete Townsend and one of the most famous musicians of the 20th century, Paul McCartney. Ron said, "It's just amazing they've heard of me and they know who I am, really. When I was at Paul McCartney's house, we played some songs and I was too afraid to play him one of mine, so I played him one of his. I mean, these guys wrote the book, and I've just been a really good student." He even performed with Leonard Cohen in, of all places, an Indigo bookstore basement. Ron had been invited for the event coinciding with Cohen's release of a book of poetry in 2006. And when he arrived, he was taken to the basement. As the elevator door opened, he could hear music. So he walked in and hung back against the wall and just enjoyed being part of the experience. And then Cohen saw Ron, walked over to him, put his arm around his shoulders, and brought him into the singing circle. Ron said, "I have a superpower of remembering lyrics, so I just started playing all these obscure Leonard Cohen songs, and Leonard was right beside me, and so when it came time to actually go out on the street, we were playing for about 5,000 people or something." 2006 was a big year for Ron Sexsmith. Not only did he get to play along with his musical heroes, but he would soon be fulfilling his lifelong dream. The young man who had listened at the door of a legendary musical venue would be stepping into the spotlight. In April 2006, he would be playing at Massey Hall. He said, "That's a biggie for me. If I could play places like that everywhere, that would be nice." Since then, he's been back 4 more times to delight audiences because soon after, his career really started to skyrocket. In 2007, he co-wrote Brandy Alexander with Feist. That song appeared on her breakthrough album, The Reminder, and a version of the song also appeared on his 2008 album, Exit's Strategy of the Soul. When Michael Bublé released his 6th studio album, Crazy Love, in 2009, it featured Ron's song, Whatever It Takes. The duet between Ron and Michael earned Ron a Juno for Songwriter of the Year. In 2011, Ron Sexsmith released his 12th studio album, Long Player, Late Bloomer, and earned a Juno nomination for Alternative Album of the Year. It was also shortlisted for the prestigious Polaris Music Prize. A documentary, Love Shines, documenting the album's recording process with heavy metal producer Bob Rock, was also made. The album did well in Canada and reached number 48 in the United Kingdom. And the career milestones kept coming. In 2013, he headlined at the Royal Albert Hall in London, England, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. He said it was a special moment for him. Ron said, "The only real rock star thing I ever did was I flew my parents to England to the show." And while the United Kingdom was always welcoming him, he never once thought about leaving home. Ron said, a lot of that comes down to his admiration for Gordon Lightfoot, who stayed in Canada despite having success. Ron said, "I love Canada. Canada makes sense to me in a world that seems crazy."
So for me, touring Canada, it's a way to connect with my fans and play some of these lovely venues we have. I've always loved living here, you know. I mean, obviously, when you're a kid, you don't really know any other world. You just sort of, you're here.
Through the COVID-19 pandemic, while everybody was quarantined at home, Ron wrote 11 songs that would become his next album, The Vivian Lane. He named the album after a street located in Stratford, Ontario, where he was living at the time. And by the time this episode is released, his album, Hangover Terrace, will be out.
It's my 18th, and they're saying, September, it'll probably see the light of day with some kind of run up to that. So that's, and then there's talk of a Canadian tour in the fall and other places as well. So that's always, for me, it's just always amazing whenever I manage to make another record, because there's so much work involved, and we recorded it last year in the UK. Mm-hmm. And again, it just all came together really beautifully.
Through his travels across the country, Ron has been able to see what makes Canada different from other countries.
We're not really in your face in the way that other cultures are. We want you to come to us, I think. It's like, and it's in the, I think we're kind of in the middle of two very the dominant cultures, like America, and you have the UK,
When asked what fills him with pride, Ron cites people like Tommy Douglas and the implementation of universal healthcare. He also believes that Canadians tend to be very forward-thinking and welcoming. But above all else is about the music for Ron Sexsmith.
It's really about the music. Like, I'm so proud to be a Canadian songwriter, and trying to follow in the footsteps of all these incredible artists like Joni and Neil and all that, Gordon Leonard. It's kind of an embarrassment of riches here, the artists that we have. And just to be a link in that chain, to be doing this for a living.
I would like to thank Ron Sexsmith for taking the time to chat with me about his life and career. In 2 weeks, I'll have another episode of Canadian History X Biography. I'll be talking to the man who crawled through a log to take us to a magical and happy world, Fred Penner.
There were huge audiences because the timing was so right, with Raffi, Sharon Olsen-Bram, and myself coming onto the scene at a critical time in Canadian children's music history. The baby boomers were demanding quality entertainment for their kids, and the three of us, the three groups, we answered that call with a lot of really good albums.
This episode was written by myself, Craig Baird, and my executive producer, Dila Velasquez. Audio production by Rosalind Kufor and Rob Johnston. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review. And I love hearing from you. And if you have a show topic you want me to cover, you can email me at craig@canadaehx.com. You can also visit my website as well as my social media. I will include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this was Canadian History X.